During this time, Udlay's family lived on the outskirts of a remote village. Although they had no nearby neighbors, this was favorable for them, especially for his father. At 18 years old, Udlay already knew the secrets of his family. Despite their poverty, many people visited them. He was puzzled by the fact that these visitors would bring items without his father's request. In fact, these gifts were what sustained their daily needs. At first, Udlay was curious but didn't question it much. Over time, he discovered the exact reason why people, who were often strangers, brought them these items. Believe it or not, Udlay's father was considered a minister by all the visitors. People didn't come to ask for mundane favors, they sought wisdom from his father. These visitors weren't ordinary people either, they carried heavy presences. Upon learning this, Udlay began to investigate his father's true identity. He vividly remembered that whenever someone visited, he would be the first to inquire about their purpose. However, despite his efforts, his father's true nature remained a mystery. Because of this, Udlay decided to confront his father to uncover the truth. One day, when there were no visitors, he quickly sought his father. Entering their home, he found his father sitting in the living room, talking to his mother. He approached them and softly spoke. "Father, are you busy? I need to talk to you." Hearing this, his father told him to wait, as he and his mother were discussing something serious. Udlay noticed that they were talking about something they didn't want him to hear. After a few minutes, his father, Lion, slowly walked towards him. As he sat in front of Udlay, he looked at him seriously, as if trying to convey something through his eyes. Udlay waited patiently for his father to speak. After a while, his father finally said, "What do you want to know, Udlay? Why do you seem restless? Haven't we talked about this before?" Udlay was almost at a loss for words, intimidated by his father's stern demeanor. Before we continue the story, please like this video to help the YouTube algorithm promote our content. Also, subscribe and click the bell icon. Your support helps us keep uploading more exciting and chilling stories. Now, let's continue the story. His father was not someone you could joke with, being very serious and straightforward. What you saw in him, you would hear from him. Gaining the courage to speak, Udlay began to recount the strange things he noticed about his father. He felt that their home was not normal, as if they were not the only ones living there. He also felt an eerie presence and saw entities passing by before he could even catch a glimpse of them. Upon hearing this, his father sighed and looked at him. Udlay thought his father wouldn't speak anymore, but to his surprise, he started to confess. According to his father, these occurrences were normal due to his duties. He explained that as a minister, it was natural for these entities to follow him. There was nothing to worry about, as these beings knew him well. Continuing their conversation, his father revealed that his role as a minister meant he was the supreme authority for all kinds of beings seeking his counsel. He held a position where he governed entities from the dark side, far surpassing the status of ordinary shamans. He represented them during meetings with other ministers like him. In case you're wondering, like civilized people, beings from the dark side also have leaders and laws they must follow. These serve as guidelines to ensure that none of them encroach on each other's territories. Despite his strong position, his father admitted that they shouldn't be complacent, as he could be killed by those who harbored ill will against him once he stepped down. This often happened to the previous ministers who preceded him. After hearing this, Udlay immediately asked his father what he gave to these beings that visited their home. His father replied seriously, "I give them wisdom. Like a shaman, my gift is the living word, which they use to strengthen their powers and achieve their desires." Upon hearing this, Udlay chose to remain silent. He realized that because of his father's actions, many people lost their loved ones. After their conversation, Udlay went outside to get some fresh air. Sitting outside their yard, he thought about seeking help from the shamans in the village. He believed that what his father was doing was wrong and couldn't just let it pass because he had good intentions for others. After hours of contemplation, Udlay decided to seek help from the shamans, even if it meant putting his father in danger. He felt responsible for the safety of their village. Later that afternoon, Udlay discreetly went to the home of an old shaman not far from their place. Upon arrival, he found the shaman treating various patients with different ailments. Observing his surroundings, Udlay saw the suffering of his fellow villagers. Most of them were victims of witchcraft or skinwalker attacks. Some visitors were nearly blind due to the severity of their ailments. After witnessing these scenes, Udlay waited patiently for his turn. After an hour and a half, Udlay finally met with the old shaman. Before he could even sit down, the shaman noticed a dark presence clinging to Udlay's body. The shaman was puzzled, saying that if an ordinary person had such an aura, they would surely be paralyzed by an undetermined ailment. The shaman believed that once a soul was tainted by another presence, it would never be normal again. The shaman also admitted that it was unusual for Udlay to remain ordinary despite these circumstances. Upon hearing this, Udlay revealed his father's role as a minister and the visits from beings seeking additional power. After sharing this, the shaman was left in disbelief, cursing in amazement at the revelations. Continuing their conversation, Udlay shared his reason for wanting to stop his father. The shaman smiled at him and said, "You're right, son. I'm telling you, you didn't make a mistake in your decision. Don't worry. My companions and I will help you escape the situation your father put you in." Hearing this, Udlay quickly bid farewell and returned home. Before he left the shaman's house, he promised to return in 3 days. Upon hearing this, the shaman replied that their group would be ready for their mission by then. As Udlay walked home, he thought of an excuse to give his father. He was very worried about the questions his father might ask, especially since he had overstayed his allowed time. After a few minutes, he saw their house in the distance, where his father stood outside with a large black dog. As he approached, his father glared at him irritably and asked, "Where have you been, Udlay? Don't lie. You know the consequences of what you do." Hearing this, Udlay quickly replied that he had just been walking around the village and had spoken with a young man at the store, which delayed him. After explaining, Udlay immediately apologized, showing remorse for his actions. However, instead of forgiving him, his father unexpectedly punched him and ordered the dog to drag him under their house. Hearing his father's command, the creature quickly grabbed him and dragged him under the house. Once there, Udlay had no choice but to enter a small cage, as the dog repeatedly barked and growled at him. As he watched the creature, he couldn't help but cry because of how his father treated him. Not only was it the first time he experienced such treatment, but he also felt like he wasn't truly his father's son. Moments later, he saw his mother walking slowly towards him. As they looked at each other, his father began to speak about the Udlay's mistake. "All your indulgences, Udlay, I've allowed. Why did you do this to me? After I trusted you, you betrayed me? Didn't you even think about why I'm doing this? It's for you too. Do you think if I didn't uphold my responsibilities as a minister, I would still be alive? We're all victims here," his father angrily exclaimed. Hearing this, Udlay cried as he tried to unlock the cage. For 2 days, Udlay remained there, surviving on insects that wandered into his cage. He learned to eat ants and drink water that was almost black from mud and chicken droppings scattered under their house. Even though Udlay's condition worsened, he continued to persevere to stay alive. During those 2 days, many beings visited their home, seeking additional powers from their minister. Udlay paid little attention to them, knowing that help was on its way. Days passed, and Udlay patiently waited for the shaman's arrival. Although he knew his father might have noticed something, he still trusted the shamans who promised to help him. One afternoon, he cried when he saw a group of shamans walking towards their house. Soon after, they entered their yard and were greeted by his father and some of his trusted followers. As the two sides conversed, the shaman told his father that if he stopped what he was doing, they wouldn't have to resort to violence. The shamans only wanted one thing, for him to hand over the book and relinquish his position as minister. The shaman explained that although it would be difficult, it was the only way to end the looming danger over their group. Upon hearing this, Udlay's father smirked and replied, "You don't know what you're talking about. You sound like children speaking out of ignorance. Try to take it. Let's see what happens." With this, the group of shamans had no choice but to prepare. Before sunset, the battle had already begun. On his father's side were 2 Skinwalker and a Wendigo. They also had a group of big dog and some elemental beings serving as their support. Udlay knew who Lion's companions were because they were close to him since he was a child. This was the first time he saw his father's trusted followers. As the events unfolded, he witnessed how the shamans fought against them. It seemed like they were equally matched, as the beings were not easily affected by the shaman's spells. Realizing this, the old shaman Udlay sought for help decided to engage in physical combat. Drawing their weapons, they charged with full force, igniting the war between the two sides. As they fought, Udlay saw how the Wendigo battled a shaman. He couldn't believe it because he thought these beings could only engage in spiritual combat. After a few minutes of fighting, the shamans noticed the Skinwalker weakening. Seeing them struggling to breathe, they quickly attacked, mercilessly striking different parts of their bodies. Moments later, a Skinwalker roared, giving the shaman the chance to attack Udlay's father. Seeing their leader, the father quickly approached, wielding a black blade. As they fought, Udlay saw how skillfully his father wielded the blade. Despite the shaman's prowess in combat, none of his attacks penetrated the minister's extraordinary defense. In this situation, the shaman was forced to use a powerful spell, prompting Udlay's father to use his last resort. After half an hour of fighting, Udlay saw the shaman's body covered in wounds. Fortunately, before he was killed, the other shamans came to his aid. Whether you believe it or not, even with the shaman's combined efforts, Udlay saw how his father managed to overpower them. It wasn't long before the old shaman managed to seize the book, causing Udlay's father to weaken. Even so, despite his weakening state, he continued to fight, believing he could still defeat their group. In fact, before he finally succumbed, he managed to kill 2 of the shamans who helped Udlay. Moments later, the shaman stopped, watching as the minister was quickly consumed by darkness. When the silence returned, they saw him standing with half of his body burned and lifeless. As they approached, he suddenly collapsed, his body quickly decomposing. Entering Udlay's home, they saw his mother and siblings in the form of dog. When these beings saw them, they quickly fled into the forest until they disappeared without a trace. You know, Mr. Z, it was never clear to Udlay why these things happened. Even the shamans who helped him were left with questions about how such events occurred. They knew they hadn't defeated the minister, but how did he suddenly lose his life? How did his mother and siblings become sigbin? Despite this, Udlay was deeply grateful for escaping his father's hands, who was a minister of darkness. Thank you for listening. If you have any thoughts on our story, please leave them in the comments section. I'd love to read them. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Hit the bell icon as well. Until our next thrilling tale, thank you.